Test. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, welcome to Kotzen Hall, to the Yanadios Library, and to the American School for today's presentation. I'm Maria Georgopoulou, I'm the director of the Yanadios Library, and tonight I'm very pleased and touched that we have an event somewhat different from what we normally do. In which this event risks to make us a little bit uneasy or altogether angry at times, but I'm sure we're not going to be bored. The presentation brings together the individual subjective meanings of many micro-histories in order to give a social dimension to political history. The presentation will introduce the audience, you, those of you who are in Kotzen Hall and those of you who see us and watch this event online. The event will introduce us to the history of the post-war Greek adoption movement, which is connected with the aftermath of the Civil War and the duration of the Cold War. Starting in 1948, some 400 Greek children were sent overseas to be adopted permanently in the US, the Netherlands, Sweden, and other countries. The intensity of the story is conditioned by its political underpinnings, namely saving the children from communism, the realization of the deep economic hardships of Greece in the 1950s, and the shame of unwed mothers in Greece. When this is combined with money-making illegal adoptions by some members of the AHEPA in the United States, the story becomes almost explosive. Our speakers today are both academics, and they come to this topic from different perspectives, as we will soon learn. They will introduce to us this most intimate history from below, so to speak. Ronda Feinstein, to the far right, who holds the Koraes Chair of Modern Greek and Byzantine History, Language and Literature at the Center for Hellenic Studies at King's College London, that she's also the director of, will offer a brief introduction to the post-war Greek adoption history, based on her 2019 book, Adoption, Memory, and Civil and Cold War Greece, Quid Pro Quo. The book has just appeared in Greek from Potamos Editions, and the title is «Ζητούνται παιδιά από την Ελλάδα, υιοθεσίες στην Αμερική του ψυχρού πολέμου». Then, Mary Cardaras, Associate Professor at California State University, East Bay, a Greek-born adoptee herself, will read from the collection of personal testimonies that she has been compiling. Mary is chair of the Department of Communication, Political Communication, Journalism, and Documentary Film. Her pioneering initiative gives voice to 13 adoptees who detail in their essays the lifelong experience of international adoption. And the book, which is in progress and will appear in March, is titled Voices of the Lost Children of Greece, Oral Histories of International Adoption, 1948-1968. She has also recently published a very moving novella, Ripped at the Root, about one particular Greek adoption. The presentation details the personal journey of several adoptees and contrasts this to the silence of Greek authorities and also of the intermediaries that were important for these adoptions. It deals with memory, discovery, trauma, and the pursuit of knowledge in order to find solace and closure. In doing so, we will not only appreciate the multiple perspectives of the story, but also the need of activism. So we will start with Ronda Fonstein, who will introduce us to Voices of the Lost Children of Greece, 1948-1968.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria, for this wonderful introduction. Beautiful way of setting the scene. Thank you also for all of you who've been involved in the organization and in the technical aspects. No small feat, but I know that here in Kotsen Hall, we're always in the best possible hands. And I'm really happy to be back here. And thank you for all of you who braved the elements and the rising COVID numbers to honor us with your presence. We're touched. Thank you. My introduction will be a historical introduction, which will remain fairly short. I'll cover a long history and a painful history in just about 20 minutes. The reason is that the book already exists. I've spoken about this before, and I really want to clear the stage in a metaphorical and a real sense for the people who are adopted and who are still adopted, because adoption stays with you, to speak for themselves. And if there is one thing I've had hoped to do by writing this history, is really to empower these people to speak for themselves. And that is happening at a rapid pace. People are speaking up, writing, presenting, contributing stories, sharing their activism, and that is happening all over the US and all over the Netherlands, and it's really a powerful thing to see. So then I will just dwell a little bit on the highlights of this adoption history, which hasn't really been integrated in any modern Greek history book. And so the time has come to really do that. We have dwelt on the pedomazoma, we've dwelt on the pedophylagma, the pedopolis, but we've never really dwelt in the teaching and writing of modern Greek history on the 4,000 adopted children that were sent abroad. And the breakdown is rather straightforward. More than 3,000 children traveled to the US between 1948 and 1962. Some more travel after 1962, but at least under better procedures. And then the entirely forgotten group, 600, also traveled to the Netherlands. And today they are Dutch, and they speak Dutch. And I'm actually in the fortunate position of mastering their language. So that was a wonderful benefit. This movement needs to be broken down in an important chronology. And the watershed date, if I may call it that, is 1953. And the chronology really is anchored in the legal framework that the USA designs to make these adoptions possible. So as much as Greece may want to send children, that is not possible unless the US opens its doors, because US immigration is nothing to mess with. And certainly not in the 1950s, when US immigration was very, very much on the lookout for communist sympathizers. And there was a fierce anti-communism in the US happening. But children are something different. Even though the US had an internal debate going on about how many refugees from Europe to let in, on the topic of letting in children, most people can agree. And that's why we see the effort of the US Immigration Service and visa services go towards letting in children who supposedly don't come with a past and will be blank slates to become contributing citizens to an American society. So then, before 1953, we see children who are the orphanatou polemu, the war orphans of the Civil War, of which there are thousands, very many. And that means most of them are already a few years older. They know their traumatic family history, and they're wanted by distant relatives or close relatives in the US to whom they are known children, an uncle, an aunt, a distant cousin. And these Greek Americans then make a special effort to get visas that are almost like family reunification visas, but technically they're called orphan visas. And so these children travel to meet their relatives by boat, and they arrive in scenic Hoboken, New Jersey, which is the pit. So quite a bit of a disappointment on arrival, but at least these children, being poor orphans in Greece wasn't much of a future. The larger family cannot necessarily absorb them, because in the early 1950s, Greece is still desperately poor and desperately devastated. So these children have a new lease on life, let's say, as orphans joining family members in the States. And that also happens with the children who are the descendants of communist exiles or communist parents in prison. The children are allowed in. And because very many travel in sibling groups, that means even if the smaller children do not know their history, the older ones do. And so these are the children then to the adults who do not look for their roots because they know their history. There's actually never been a secret about their history. They may want to reacquaint themselves with Greece, but it's not driven by that existential question of who am I and how can I find out what my story is of my very early days. Everything changes then in the summer of 1953, when clearly Americans want to adopt more children. America is undergoing the baby boom. It's frowned upon not to be raising children. It's almost an unpatriotic thing to do. Couples who can't have children really feel that they're kind of a little bit on the margins of society. People want to belong, and to use a phrase that comes from somebody else, they want to build nuclear families in a nuclear war. That's the ideal, and that's where the Cold War and the orphan movement intersects. So now we see a huge demand coming from the Americans to adopt children, preferably very young children, which is always the typical scenario in an adoption history, and preferably children that come without too many strings attached. So in a way, children who still have a whole other family or so are not the most desirable ones. The most desirable ones are those that are given up. And therefore, the focus shifts to the children, the exogama, the illegitimate children of unwed mothers who saw no future raising this child in this country, given the huge taboos, and who are consenting to having their child sent for adoption to the US. Consenting is a loaded word, because what is consent when you really don't have any other options? It's a consent that is based on and at that time, a society that doesn't offer an infrastructure or even a job to an unwed mother. The phenomenon of a single mother is at that time not present in Greece. So these very, very young children then, who are again supposed to be blank slates, travel to Americans of all ethnic groups, but always white Americans, who want them because they want to start a family and they want to do that with children as young as possible. And Greek children are wanted because they are white, they want the healthy ones, and they are available. And that's important. Soon enough, Korean children will be sent, but not every family of 1950s America is interested in taking a child that is racially different. They want this adoption to happen as if it's a biological child, without questions asked by curious outsiders. So that's very important. And this is then the phenomenon of stranger adoptions. A stranger couple adopts a stranger child, and the intermediary will do the matching. And the couples actually become rather demanding, if I may say that. They specify that they want a blonde and blue-eyed child, a girl. The girls are always in demand, and they'll settle for a dark-haired, dark-eyed, vivacious girl from Greece. So you can kind of see that there is a little bit of a consumerist demand going on there. And they choose from pictures. And that's a little uneasy because it feels as if you're picking from a catalog, but they choose from pictures. Most parents do not travel to Greece themselves. They have intermediaries working for them who work with proxy authority, and then they meet their child at the airport for the first time. And that makes for some pretty exciting stories, because the child has just traveled for 2 days, is exhausted, is bombarded with all these strange people, the press has been called in, flashlights are going off. So the first arrival is pretty intimidating for this little child. But then things go better as soon as things settle. And these children now travel by plane. And that the reason I say this is that makes them also more traceable. On Ancestry, you find a lot of flight records. We can actually trace their movements. We can trace their entire itinerary, including the people they traveled with. And they're very curious to find other people they traveled with. They look for some sort of a kinship, and this is very, very powerful today. They look for each other as a way to share this experience. And here you see a picture of infamous TWA advertising that they are instrumental in bringing over these children. And mind you, these children are now a little younger, and soon enough they become even younger, because the demand is actually for as close to newborn as possible. So this main movement then of Greek children traveling to the US for adoption, always with a chaperone, is a movement that is being discussed in 1948 and reaches its peak around 56, 59, all the way to 1962. By 1959 and 1962, scandals break out. And the scandals are actually the reason for the decline of this movement. And because the scandals break out and people kind of get upset about, sending children to Americans and the Americans buying our children and all of that, the movement takes a whole new geographical direction. And then the Netherlands become attractive, because the Netherlands don't have this kind of imperialist overtone. The Netherlands were actually very war-torn themselves. And in 1953, the Netherlands suffered a huge water damage. And so sending children to the Netherlands then becomes the less politicized option. It's still a pathway for children, especially illegitimate children, to go and find a family, but the Netherlands doesn't come with all those connotations that the US has established in Greece by the late 1950s. But I hasten to say, given that 1959, for instance, is a peak year, I call this a phenomenon of the Cold War. This is not a phenomenon necessarily of the Civil War. Only the first stage is a phenomenon of the Civil War. Most of these children are born after 1955. Some are born in 1964. So all of a sudden, to call them the aftermath of a civil war is a bit of a stretch. They are really basically the object of an offer that Greece is making to meet a demand that is coming from the US, prosphorake etc. Now we need to do some comparing, and this leads to startling conclusions. Greece sent 3,200 children in this 15-year period from 1948 to 62. Korea sent just about 1,000 more. And so you think, wait a minute, Korea is in the lead, obviously, right? Korean War, you can kind of see the scenario. But at that time, Korea has 4 times the population of Greece. Greece has barely 7 million. Korea has 4 times that much. So for Korea, to have a number that is barely 1,000 larger than Greece, that tells you proportionally just how many Greek children were sent. From a Greece that had already lost more than 20,000 children to the pedomazoma, lots of children to the war, lots of children to immigration to Germany, massive immigration. So Greece is really bleeding people. And no wonder we have a demographic today, a demographic problem, but Greece let go of an additional 4,000 adopted children, young, dynamic, talented, healthy prospects. The celebrities get involved. Isn't that always the case, right? Celebrity and adoption seems to kind of go together. Sure enough, here is Danny Kaye on the Acropolis with Greek orphans in nice white aprons, just as white as the columns of the Acropolis, of the Parthenon. So Greek children are wanted because they are white. There is a certain aura involved in, the Greek legacy, antiquity. So these children are supposed to come as blank slates, but if they have a history, it won't be the Civil War trauma, it will be the 5th century BC. And I find that a rather uneasy phenomenon, because there is the Parthenon doing its job to make the sales pitch more real. So then, who are the mediators? This is not this is the most uncomfortable chapter of the talk. Diahepa is in the lead, but Diahepa starts out, I hasten to say, with the best possible intentions. Diahepa has already a lot of history placing refugees in communities all over the US. They've dealt with racism, they've dealt with settlement issues, problems getting settled, language issues. So Diahepa is in the lead and helps actually to design the legal framework to make more adoptions possible. So this is the early 1950s, best possible intentions. What happens by the late 1950s, AHEPA presidents are involved in scandals that have to do with money, and indeed the word baby trafficking comes into play. But these leaders do still get acquitted. And I want to emphasize that. They get charged, but they also get acquitted. Because everybody believes that even though there was, and we have to prove, even though there was money involved, it's still a good thing to keep saving children, to keep sending them to wealthy Americans. So even though by 1964, children really are not going hungry and really don't need to be saved, rather the unwed mother needs to be supported, the kind of framework, the mentality that all these children, send them to America and they will be fine forever after, that lasts a lot longer than it should. So no wonder scandals break out, because Greece is still fulfilling the high demand of America, and when the demand outstrips the supply, the intermediary makes money. That's always the case. That's an economic principle. And so when the AHEPA scandal breaks out, the leadership withdraws from this. They clearly have been too deep into this, they withdraw, and they leave a vacuum. And then other people fill this vacuum because there is still a demand and there's still money to be made. And so the brother-sister pair, Issachar, for instance, they place 220 babies alone, just the two of them alone. And if we then know that by the late 1950s, the going rate is about $2,500 in profit, then you can kind of see that this adds up. So what we have is not an attempt to find families for children, but a fierce competition between these various intermediaries to find the children, to make sure that families find children rather than children finding families. And it's startling to me that this whole deterioration of what started as something very humanitarian and altruistic could deteriorate so quickly. And at that time, the state is actually rather hands-off. The intermediaries, who are lawyers who know the system, handle this, and they handle this with a startling amount of autonomy. And so, yes, Father Diavatis was involved in Texas, single-handedly placing about 80 children. Queen Frederica was involved, and we've always known that, but she kind of comes in later in the picture. Pigpa is involved, but Pigpa is slow, and that means that these other lawyers who work independently can fulfill the demand much faster and can also raise the price because speed is of the essence. Some parents get their child in 2 weeks. Normally you have to wait 9 months. Some parents get a child in 2 weeks. That also leaves many unprepared parents. The International Social Service must be given credit for being the only ones at this time to insist on proper procedures. What was then considered proper procedures, and also keeping proper paperwork. For all the others, they didn't really care about the paperwork, because the idea was that the child will go to America, will be living happily ever after, and who will ever care about the prehistory, about the paperwork. So paperwork is a really sore point, because only the ISS cared to keep paperwork. And then even some travel agents get involved as if they had any experience. When the people themselves speak, they point out, and this is a powerful movement of people speaking and writing for themselves, they point out the vulnerabilities. The blatant absence of proper screening of the adoptive parents just shouts itself from the page. These parents had often, some parents had been rejected by social services in the US for an American adoption and turned to Greece and get what they want. And that's very painful. And then to know that there is also no follow-up to see how the child will fare, that is a recipe of disaster. And here are the people speaking to these personal experiences themselves. But I want to insist for a moment on my last slide. Most histories are in the past and cannot be corrected. Here's a part of history that can be corrected and therefore should be corrected. Clearly a lot went wrong here and a lot of things went right as well. But what can be corrected should be corrected because we have a moral obligation to do so. And so I want to present to you the 3 R's of redress, correction. More research. I don't want to be the only one talking to this topic. We need more books and we need to have them come from Greeks, from the social historians of Greece, and we need more access to archives. It would be wonderful if the state designed a task force to really get to the bottom of it. The Netherlands just recently did this. They did an in-depth investigation of 65 years of Dutch adoption history, and they found problems and scandals and government corruption for 60 years of it. But they admitted to it. More power to them. We need access to the records. We need easier access to the records. There is a law of '96 facilitating that, but it's now kind of circumvented or confined by the fact that the GDPR, the data protection law, is something that is new. People don't understand it. People are afraid of the responsibilities of breaking this open. And lastly, we need recognition that this happened. This is a part of Greek history and it needs to be discussed. It can't be the skeleton in the closet of a family, and it shouldn't be the skeleton in the closet of Greece itself. And recognition is for the adoptees very real. They would like their citizenship back because they lost it as babies and it was not their fault. And whatever little paperwork they have, it points to Greece. And if they don't know anything else as foundlings or so, if they don't know anything else, the only thing that is certain about them is that they're Greek. So guess what? They want their citizenship back. And I'm the one to support that, and I'm also very glad to have help on that topic. Thank you.
So now we will hear from Mary Cardaras.
Kalispera σας. Thank you to Maria and the Yanadias for inviting me to this grand space in this event. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I have come not as a scholar or a journalist or a writer, but as an adoptee, a child of Greece, to tell you my story and to represent the stories of a few of my friends, Greek-born adoptees like me, living, breathing testaments, Honda's book, come to life. Up until recently, being born Greek was the only thing I knew for sure about myself. I know I am from this place, from this city. I am very proud to be from here, and I love this country. At my core, it holds my identity, and I have cherished this one known, indisputable fact: Είμαι Ελληνίδα. I am Greek. I was not born an orphan in 1955. I had a mother and a father. The circumstances of my birth are unclear, but we know that I was born in the Athens Maternity Hospital just off Syntagma, long since torn down. My birth mother was either forced or encouraged or needed to relinquish me to the Athens Municipal Foundling Home. As I am sure most of you know, it has long been since transformed, first into an art gallery, then shuttered, but when it was a home for babies and children, it was my home. I was given the number 44488 when I was deposited at the institution. I was small and malnourished, but I guess I managed to charm a Greek couple, my future grandparents, Dan and Mary Dracos, who came looking for a Greek baby for their daughter and son-in-law who could not conceive a child of their own. They wanted a Greek baby, Greek like them. The story goes that there were 2, sometimes 3 babies to a crib at the orphanage. It was nap time, but I was awake. No surprise there. I watched them as they walked up and down the crowded aisles. With stiffened tiny arms, I picked myself up to watch them, and as if to say, what about me? They looked back at me, watching them, and said, that's our baby. I went from that orphanage to an institutional foster home, then to another privately arranged one, then aboard a cruise ship for a long trip across the Atlantic to New York City, then to Chicago by air, and finally to a car ride to Gary, Indiana, where I spent my growing up years in a new home with new parents and a big new Greek family, although they were strangers to me. My being adopted is a coat I have worn all my life. I have never taken it off because no one would let me take it off. It has characterized my life, and in many ways, it is a stigma that carries a different meaning for different people. And there has been discrimination as a result, which in certain settings negated my feelings and certainly my desire to want to belong. I want to make it absolutely clear before I continue that my life before my adoption and my life afterward as an adoptee are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, one has absolutely nothing to do with the other. I was adopted, thankfully, into a Greek home. My language, my culture, my religion were not taken from me. The Greek family who raised me was wonderful and loved me with all their hearts. Many of them are here tonight, and I belong to them. There is no question about that. My life before, however brief, is also as much a part of me. I also belong to other people. I had a life before I left for a new one, and I hope I had a mother who missed me and loved me and felt sad that she sent me away. It would help me to know that she has missed me and that she thought about me. For years, I quietly asked questions, wanting to know where and from whom I came, but I did not want to hurt the family who had given me everything, so I said very little out loud and to very few people. My father died in 2000 and my mother in 2018, and it was when I lost her that I experienced a profound and deep sadness and feeling of being alone. I felt completely untethered, almost like a second abandonment. I returned to Greek school in order to reconnect. I needed to hear and speak my language. I've always loved Greek music, but listened to it even more. I even began to listen to Greek Orthodox hymns and chanting. I discovered and fell in love with one Petros Gaetanos, the great Byzantine psalty. Like a baptism, I wanted to dip myself, immerse myself in the culture, and I did. At Greek school, I met Kathy Kearns, a Greek woman whose cousin would change my life. I cannot tell my story with also not telling you about Dina Poulias. We are linked forever, and for me, she is the center point of Greek-born adoptees, the poster child for what we are talking about tonight. Her story touched me deeply, rattled me, upset me, provoked me to fully wake up. When I heard her story, I asked to meet Dina, and I did, when she visited her cousin Kathy in California. I asked her if I could write her story. We corresponded through email and talked on the phone several times, and finally, after several months, she agreed, after giving it a lot of thought, because she would have to relive her painful story in the retelling of it to me. As I was writing it, I needed to confirm some disturbing information I discovered, and I was led to an incredible Dutch scholar, a very tall woman named Ronda Feinstein, who happened to speak Greek and who happened to have written an amazing book about the history and circumstances of some 4,000 Greek-born adoptees. Ronda's book was a complete revelation. How could I have been so sheltered from this story, so ignorant of my own history? I have called Ronda the adoptee whisperer because she has become the champion and the confidant for hundreds of us, and I'm grateful. Simultaneously, a new book had come out in America about the nefarious aspects of adoption there too, an adoption industrial complex, told with a story similar to Dina's, a poignant story which carries the terrific book American Baby, produced by the gifted, sensitive writer and investigative reporter Gabrielle Glazer. She cracked my heart into pieces and then began to support and encourage my adoption search. The adoption stories, the one in American Baby and Dina's story, has serious consequences, serious repercussions. It was then and there when I began to delve once again into my own adoption, open and honestly, and began to come into contact with others like me. I began to write, and I have not stopped writing. In fact, I am compelled to write and to talk. The talking part should not be any surprise to those who know me. My book about Dina was just recently published. As Maria said, it is called Ripped at the Root, and Dina has such courage in letting her story be told. I am honored that I was her voice. I will say this starkly. There's no other way to say it. Dina was a stolen baby from Greece. She was stolen from her mother and father, a mother and father who loved her and wanted her. Their crime was that they were from a small, remote village. Their crime was that they were not married. Their crime was that they got themselves into a situation. She became pregnant. Two people, very deeply in love, were going to have a baby. But all those lives were to be devastated by the loss and disappearance of this child, who would have been Penelope Papazachari. By the vehicle of adoption, she became Dina Politis. She didn't find out she was adopted until she was 7 years old, an impressionable age, an age where you can feel betrayal, even if you don't know the word for it yet. She was raised an only child and would not find out until a lifetime later, 42 years later, that there were parallel lives belonging to her a half a world away. Dina Politis married and became Dina Poulias. In my mind, Dina is symbolic of all our stories and our desire to be welcomed back home, restored to this country, our country, from which we were stripped, a new identity created, our past extinguished, our families taken like we had never existed here at all as Greeks. It is the first thing we knew about ourselves, that we were born Greek, and we are proud of it. We love this country. And if you speak to any one of us, we will tell you that when we are away from Greece, we long for it and can't wait to return. In March, Anthem Press, as Maria said, will publish a book of essays, 13 of them, the first of its kind, all first-hand accounts from Greek-born adoptees. It is called Voices of the Lost Children of Greece. It will be published early next year, probably in March. All the stories are different, but there are similar themes relating to our feelings about our adoptions and our feelings about being Greek and from here. Many of the stories are sad. Some are very painful. There was some abuse that is recounted. Many of us were not raised by Greeks, taken completely out of the culture. Several of us were raised by Jews, so taken out of the religion too. It is important that we hear these stories, which are testament to a difficult period in the history of Greece when thousands of its children were taken away from their homes and families. Time is running out. Many of our birth parents and siblings have died, so the reunions we desperately seek are less and less likely. Many of us have died, never knowing much about ourselves. That is why I was invited here tonight, to tell you a bit about us and our stories. We may have been lost, but now we are certainly found through our own thoughts and words here tonight with all of you. I cannot tell you about all of them, and so I will choose some, although it does not mean the others were not as important. To quote writer Gabrielle Glazer, we all matter. They all matter. The focal point in my own story is my birth mother. I can't explain it. She is an enigma. She has always been present from the time I was a little girl, in my heart always, and we will always be somehow joined. I literally came from her. I read a quote recently written by a mother to her son, whom she gave up for adoption. She wrote to him every day on his birthday, not knowing whether he would ever read her words to him. But the same words could have been written by a child who was given up by its mother. It reads, "I wish I could describe to you what it's like to miss someone you've only known for a brief moment." This quote resonates with me. Of my own birth mother, in my own essay, I wrote, "My birth mother was poor and had become a mother who would have nothing to show for it, except for the shame. The word in Greek is dropi. Presumably, she had no one to go to and no place to go to. I imagine her disappearing into a battered but recovering city of Athens, maybe to a friend's home, a relative, or to nowhere, wandering, confused, and frightened, trying to figure out what to do. She needed someone to hold her. She needed someone to love her. Was I in her heart? Did she wonder who would feed me that day? What woman's breast would stand in for hers? What woman's arms would cuddle me, soothe me, rock me to sleep so that I could forget that my mother left? Did she think about my life and her absence from it? Did she love me at all?" My friend, my brother adoptee, Robert, he was raised by a Jewish family in New York City, an only child. He wrote, "Being adopted, or to be more accurate, given up, means expendable. Not on a conscious level, but deep inside that private place we all have where we muster the courage to face the world, where we define ourselves in the most fundamental way. You do not measure up and never quite arrive. It is a picture that is always distorted, at times dramatically, at others somewhat, but never completely clear, never totally right. You are different, you just are." Robert has an incredible story. He was separated not only from his mother and father, but from a sibling. He was ripped from his twin brother. Robert, the Jewish boy from New York, has a twin brother who is a Greek Orthodox priest here in Greece. The papa had no idea he was adopted until he was an ordained priest and after his adoptive parents had died. He too was raised an only child. These secrets bred from the act of adoption ultimately do no one any good. When Robert returned to Greece for the first time, decades after his birth, he said he instantly remembered the smell of Greece. He said he could smell the air, the warmth in the air, from when he left when he was a child. He knew that smell of his country. He knew it. He smelled home. Nick, he writes about being angry for years at a birth mother he had never known. Why did she give him away? At college, he went to a talk given by a fellow student who was a teenage unwed mother herself and talked about the process and the pain of giving away her child. Nick was deeply moved by what she said and was emotional over it. He wrote in his essay, "When I got home that night, I went to bed and cried myself to sleep, begging my birth mother to forgive me for my feelings of hatred and resentment toward her and for being so selfish by not considering her feelings. I told her that I loved her and that I would never forget her." David, he has had a very successful reunion with his birth mother and her side of the family. His essay opens with a letter to him from his mother after she learns that she has found her. After she first learns that he has found her. She writes, "My sweet boy, my beloved child, my good boy, I would have liked to be keeping you in my arms till I die, to have you near me from the moment you were born, to warm your sensitive heart with my love and affection, but fate was really hard to me and the morals of our country cruel and inhumane. I gave your life from my life and flesh from my flesh, but I lost you, my child, right from the moment you were born, and only great unspoken and incurable pain was left to me. Now that you are a man, I can open my heart to you." From Sonia, who was adopted to a family from the Netherlands and loves Greece with all her heart. She went to Greek school and now speaks Greek. She returns to Greece as often as possible. I was surprised to learn from her about the notion of adoption itself. She writes, "I have so much respect for people who adopt, but I knew that I would never do it. Had I not been able to have a child of my own, I would have remained childless. I would not want my adopted child to go through the turmoil that I went through. I am experiencing now what it does to you to be adopted, always looking at the past, constantly looking back over your shoulder, always wondering who your mother is, who your father is, whether you have any brothers and sisters. I was adamant. For my biological child, it will always be clear who her family is." Maria. Her conception was yielded after her mother was raped by the best friend of her father in a small mountain village on one of the islands. But it was the mother, in a sign of the times, who was punished, victimized, and vanquished from her chorio. What shocked me about Maria's story is that her mother, even though violently violated as a teenager, she loved and missed the child she carried. Maria writes, "With no job or family or support, she had no other option but to place me in the local orphanage until her situation improved. 3 years later, her circumstances were no better, and she lost me through an adoption to the United States. Through tears of regret and anguish, my mother said, 'It broke my heart, but I agreed to let you go so you could have a better life. All these years, I knew I had a daughter in America, and I have never forgotten about you. I have prayed my entire life that you would come to Greece and find me because I knew I'd never be able to come to America to find you.'" And from Alexa, someone I have known for over 40 years, we met to discover that our parents were friends all their lives in Gary, Indiana, and they had both adopted Greek children. Alexa, too, was taken into a Greek home. She was adopted at age 4, a tough age, an age when there is memory and when there is pain. She was told a story that her parents were killed in an accident, a fiery village mountain crash. She writes, "Why didn't anyone from my Greek family take me in? Why didn't anyone step up to take care of me? Why was I unwanted? I think this memory is the root of a deep sadness that I was unwanted. Was I unlovable? Had I done something wrong? And if so, what had I done?" From Robin, whose name was Yanula. Her love for Greece is something she speaks of all the time. She was mistreated by adoptive parents and abused by men who professed to love her. She found her family and met her birth mother just 3 months before she died here in Greece. She writes, "This was all I had ever dreamed of, to learn what unconditional love is. I found it when I went home to Greece. That is when I found out that my birth mother never really wanted to give me up at all. But destitute and in despair, she saw no other option. The outcome would have been infinitely better for all parties involved if she had just received a little extra support from family or social services in Greece to help her through the rough patches in life." And finally, from Meryl, a child raised an all-American boy in the Midwest by an all-American family with no sense of anything Greek. He had been literally left on the steps of a church in Patra with a name taped to his infant clothing, Mitsos. He still searches for someone, anyone, that he is related to some 50 years after the fact. After one of his journeys here to Greece to search for his roots, a priest in Patra, during Easter services, was touched by his story and wanted to help. In fact, Honda was there with a film crew and helped Meryl communicate with the priest just before the church service. He writes, "The church was crowded. It was Easter services, after all, the holiest time in the Orthodox calendar. I was standing near the front of the church. Ronit was filming, and as the priest spoke, her lens pointed at me. The priest said, 'He was left here at our church and has been looking for his roots for many years. It is up to this community, our community, to help him find his family. He is also part of our community, and we have an obligation to make it right.' It was one of the best experiences I have ever had in my life. The only word I can use to describe it is magical. And of course, I didn't understand a word they were saying, but I knew what they were trying to tell me. We are your children, your people, and we want to come home. What does this mean? Well, we need help from social service agencies in Greece to open adoption records, to help us find our original birth certificates, to give us all and any information about ourselves, and to make the process easy and easy to access. We need this information to feel complete and whole. As I said before, time is running out, and it did run out for me. The photo on the poster you have seen about this event tonight is of me, half of my face at age 3. The image was snapped at another milestone transition in my life. For me, it was at this moment when I left my life as a Greek citizen and became one in America. If you ask me, I didn't look too happy about it. This moment is symbolic because each and every one of us was stripped of our Greek citizenship, and we each echo the words of Melina Mercouri, who said in the title of her famous book, "I was born Greek." We too were born Greek. It is our identity, and we feel that it is our birthright. This should not be political or controversial. In my mind, we should not equivocate on this point. If Greece can and has granted citizenship to authors and actors and philanthropists and athletes, it should also automatically grant the same to those who were born here, came from here, were taken against their will from here. What was taken should be restored. It is both fair and just. In return, Greece gets its children back. They will be acknowledged, and they will have more love than they already do for this small, important country, and who will return again and again to their first home to spend time and money and to celebrate the culture that has changed the world. I hope we don't have to wait as long as the Parthenon marbles to be returned home. My dream is that this will happen sooner rather than later, and that it could be done in grand fashion. A mass ceremony of us in attendance, a magnanimous gesture by Mr. Mitsotakis and his government to correct the remnants of a painful historic past. Thank you for your attention, your patience. It has been a great honor. Ήταν μεγάλη τιμή. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you, Mary and Gonda, of course, for this quite powerful presentation and very moving. I wonder, before we open the floor to questions, and there will be questions, I'm sure, also online, I wondered if you two want to sort of speak to each other. Or you're good friends. I know you've said it all, but still. Okay. So, questions? Can I read a testimony? Oh, you have a question. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you, for this very, very personal account, but also for the book, Gonda, and the political account here. And my question is more in the direction of the political. You alluded to the importance of Greece for American identity and to the cultural importance of Greece, cultural heritage and all that stuff. Could you draw some more connections with Korea, which is an amazing, I think, comparison, and a piece of information that is available or had been available so far to very, very few people. So how would you place that story in the context of the time, in the context of Cold War politics that obviously you briefly discuss? And again, why Greece at the time carries such a great importance?
That's Despina, right?
Yes, yes.
Hello, Despina.
Hi.
Thank you for the question. We need to acknowledge that the origins of this adoption movement are lying in anti-communism. And the same happened in Korea. That's where Korea and Greece meet each other. And it's not a coincidence that the first children that are sent to America are either orphan children or children of communists, for that matter. So it's very much a movement that is geared towards, first of all, taking a certain crop of the population and making sure that they don't turn communist, but also rubbing salt in the wounds of communist families that they are not even considered good enough to parent children that are born in their family environment. So it becomes extra painful for a communist family to see their child given to capitalist America. So it becomes a little bit of a punitive tool as well. That covers only the first years. After that, the emphasis is really on illegitimate children. And I hate the word illegitimate. No, there's nothing illegitimate about the child. It's that the mother is actually not allowed to be a mother by the strong coercions and taboos of the family. That's the only illegitimate part, that it's considered an illegitimate way to raise a child, which is very unfortunate. So the movement very much shifts from a political movement to a movement of adoption that blossoms, if you want, under the continued social taboos that reign here. Yeah. Korea comes in because there too, Korea actually, when you think of the fact that a lot of the Korean children that were sent for adoption to America, a lot of those children were fathered by American servicemen. So they are mixed race, a very loaded term, and because they're mixed race, they are marginalized in their society. So the first adoptees from Korea are basically sent to the US to be adopted by Americans, being at least 50% offspring of America. Now, mind you, given that Greece did not have an equivalent group of what we call GI babies, that makes the numbers of Greece even more startling. Because there we have no massive American presence of American servicemen fathering children. The DNA shows it. There is no American father's blood here. They are, for all practical purposes, entirely Greek. So if you take that group out of the Korean equivalent, you're just really startled by the numbers. Thank you, Despina.
If you don't mind, I'll read some of the questions and comments. Elpis Kochlioru her PhD focuses on the theme of adoption, and she's very happy to hear about your coming out. She says that there's a lot of work that we need to do in order to shed light to our unique adoptee stories. She's looking forward to your book. We feel things from the past that is instinctive knowledge, an airy feeling, and can only be understood to the ones who felt alike. That smell you're talking about is what we have to carry across. Another testimonial. I would like to tell you that, Fran Rabias, that the day I found my mother was Good Friday by a sheer divine intervention. I hear this story and now wonder how many others found their path during the same time of holiest days. I was stolen and my mother thought me dead. I was resurrected. I have two questions, sorry. Has there been any recognition by any Greek government that this has happened during that time? And thank you very much for the touching stories and fascinating history. This is by Zofka Zinofiev. Congratulations on the wonderful books. Can Mary Cardaras please say whether adoptees have applied for Greek citizenship already and whether there has been a problem?
It's a maze. Many have applied. It's a legal maze. Mostly it's trying to prove who you are. A lot of the papers are missing, so it's a puzzle piece. But what mystifies me is that when we left the country, we were each issued it's a very big blue passport with our little baby picture stamped in there. So we had to have been born in Greece to receive this document anyway. But again, many have applied and have been denied, and the process is long and it's very expensive. They often don't get anywhere, and then they just give up. But now, now that we're talking again, I think there's been a resurgence of interest, and we feel like we have an opening with Mr. Mitsotakis and his government, that at least they're paying attention. Is that accurate?
Yes, and I hope to make it even more accurate as we speak. To pick up on Maria's question of whether any government has ever done a systematic registering of these cases or a deep, in-depth investigation, the answer is no. Not then, not now, not for the past 70 years of this history. And I am very much encouraging that research would be part of the recognition that this issue should be given. I did a lot of research on the movements going out of this country to the Netherlands and to the US, but a whole different history remains to be written about adoption within this country, because there are many cases where people were told their baby had died in the hospital, and then because of the scandals, they think there's something fishy about that story. They think their baby was really taken. On the other hand, you have to presume that especially in the 1950s, there was infant mortality. That is a real and a strong, very present phenomenon. But because this history is now tainted by suspicions of illegality, everything becomes, everything is approached with skepticism. So clearly an in-depth investigation is very much needed. And the government, not a single government, I'm not singling out anyone in particular, has ever paid attention to this issue.
I was very touched by the the sense of smell and what it is that, in fact, one misses, and what home or what nostalgia means and is.
You know, Maria, the first time I came here back, by the way, with my grandparents, the ones who took me out of the country, I too had this kind of this mystical experience. I mean, I honestly felt like I was coming home. I mean, I was coming home. It wasn't a foreign country to me. I hadn't been here since I was young, but you feel that. And every adoptee has said the same thing, every one of them. But the smell is something else, yeah.
A question there?
Stories. I was trying to understand whether this was a narrative about adoption or if it was something specifically about Greece. And if it was something specifically about Greece, given the context in which these children were adopted, when Greece was destroyed, basically, was it a bad thing that these children were adopted?
I wouldn't say it was a bad thing, but there was a total and utter disregard for parents, for the mother, especially. And so there was no care for the mother. In my case, my mother was 18 years old, certainly old enough to raise a baby. And it's as if what she felt, what was happening didn't matter. And there was no support for her or the baby. The instinct was to take the baby and say, you can't take care of it. You can't take care of it at all. And then the shame of having to leave villages and homes and families. Mine was literally kicked out of her village. She never returned to her village. Mm-hmm. There was such shame. And in my case, my birth mother changed her name to disappear so she didn't have to think about what happened to her. So a bad thing, I don't know, but it certainly wasn't, they were not handled properly. They were not these mothers led lives of pain and anguish their whole lives.
I would like to add to that there was also no sense of record keeping. It kind of didn't matter if, you know, the child would never have questions, nobody cared to keep names, record keeping was non-existent. And so was proper screening of the adoptive parents. Like I said, a whole lot of parents had already been rejected internally through the American system and then were immediately cleared for a Greek adoption. In the end, in these thousands and thousands of cases, I've only ever known of one being rejected. So guess what? You pretty much passed automatically. And that is painful, that there's so little screening and so little follow-up. And then it becomes a little bit the luck of the draw, right? If you're lucky, you have a good set of parents. But this is not how one should handle a child's fate. It's not a lottery ticket.
May I read a couple of comments? I saw at least 2 hands. Thank you, Alexa Maros. Thank you so much, Gonda and Mary. I cried, but I'm so happy to have our story told. Kevin Lee, amen. Thank you for your testimony, Fran, which I read before. And from Elizabeth Andreadis Birch, I'm literally in tears. God bless you all. Thank you for sharing your stories and bringing awareness to this incredibly important topic. And Alexa Maros, I guess this must have come after we spoke about smell. She says, Greece forever calls out to us. When in Greece, I know I'm home. One more thing, thanks for this moving and inspiring session. I was struck by the Danny Kaye photo and the metaphorical power of the setting, the whiteness, the blank slate. Is there any documentation of the sort of discourses, advertisements, as it were, that the middlemen use to encourage potential adopters in the US? From Richard Martin.
If there is any what?
Any documentation of the source of discourses, advertisements, let's say, to encourage people from the US to adopt Greek.
Yes. When you read the magazine of the AHEPA organization, the AHEPAN, there are pictures, there are calls for adoptive families, there are petitions. The leadership sends out petitions to the members so that the members kind of join and approach their congressman to ask for the numbers of adoptions to be raised to, you know, from several thousands to several thousand more. So there is quite some action going on. The airlines get in on the game with, like, you know, pictures of we were involved in transporting babies. So there is a lot of like, there's quite a sales pitch going on and a lot of publicity going on. The Americans approach this topic with almost an aggressive sense of publicity. You know, the child's arrival, a little group will be met with the reporters, the pictures are in the newspaper, the addresses of the parents are in the newspaper, and at the same time, the woman who gave up the baby in Greece, and Greece itself, will treat this issue with kate echemithia, with every bit of confidentiality and secrecy. So every bit of confidentiality and secrecy and anonymity in Greece, every bit of publicity in the US. It's a stark contrast.
Kyria Boura?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this very interesting and very touching presentation. But I was wondering, have there been adoptions in the United States from other European countries after the war?
Oh, yes. Yes, and I'm glad you bring that up. This is currently the debate in Ireland, Scotland, England, the Netherlands, Sweden, France, Belgium, all of them looking at a history where international adoption has gone badly wrong. Either sending children like Ireland, Italy, Austria, Germany after the war, Korea, Japan, or taking in children like Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Sweden. All of it, every bit as problematic. And you kind of wonder, in Ireland, for instance, this debate is very potent, also with the very repressive Catholic Church and the problematic mother and baby homes, and real diminishing of the mother's role again, making the mother feel like a fallen woman, and then church and state collaborating in sending these children for adoption to the US, because we again have a pool of white babies. And so in Ireland, this is a huge debate. What is different in Greece is that we haven't reached that level of debate yet.
There's a question. Alexander Kitrev.
Thanks so much. You were both so powerful. And I'm reacting in different ways to what you said because there's so much, there's so many levels. Ronda, you've put the issue of adoption on the historiographical agenda, and that's something that'll hopefully take off. There were orphans adopted by Americans after the Asia Minor disaster. We've heard a lot about the orphans taken by American philhellenes after 1821. There is some kind of continuity of presence of orphans being saved, in quotation marks, from Greece throughout the 200 years of the great Greek state. So that's the one thing. And then, of course, there's the political one about governments acknowledging. I'm not holding my breath on that as far as the Greek situation is concerned. But Mary, your story is so compelling and so powerful. And, you know, I'm resisting being angry that Maria rightly said we could just all be very angry now and express our anger, and thinking of ways forward. And I'm thinking of the way that the Greek governments acknowledged the issue of the people expelled, the people who left Greece after the Civil War, who weren't allowed to return, and they came back with the Andreas Papandreou government, and it was done in a very, as many things were done at the time, in a very rhetorically emotional. There wasn't any introspection. There wasn't any thinking. There wasn't any accountability. It was just said these people need to come back, and in that emotional flurry, they came back. They were given citizenship, and I'm.
Not all of them.
No, yes. Not the ones who were from who were Slavo-Macedonians, I think. Yes, that's an important footnote, a big one. But so, if I'm thinking forward, what should be done? Okay, the historians will do their stuff. You can knock on the door of the politicians. Mary's got to get her story out. I think that's how it's going to be.
I never argue with anyone on social media, ever. Even when somebody says something outrageous, I just say, thank you, that was interesting. I don't engage that way. But there was a man from America recently when we were talking about citizenship for Greek-born adoptees, and he said, why do you think you deserve, what do you give to Greece? That's what he said. What contribution do you make to Greece? And I did respond to that. And why do we deserve this citizenship? There is controversy around it. And I think the Greek government is very concerned that if you start handing out citizenships like candy, that there's going to be this slippery slope. Then, okay, what about the refugee situation? The refugees who are born here, which, by the way, in my opinion, if they're born in Greece, and so many of them were born in Greece and speak Greek and are Greek and identify as Greek, should be, forget their parents, but those children. And I just don't know how we can be denied. There's no doubt about where we come from. So I'm going to keep talking, Professor.
There is a comment, more of a comment than a question, by Vasilis Zarifis, who said that he enjoyed very much your talk, but he also says that it pains him that people equate the bad behavior of a few members of HEPA on adoption profiteering and projecting it to the general organization. And the worthy causes and achievements of the last 100 years. It's like for Hellenism. It's like blaming all the Germans for the Nazi atrocities.
May I say something? My parents and grandparents were Heppens, proud of Heppens, and that organization has done so much good in the world. So we would like to go on the record by saying that's the truth. However, I do think that it needs to acknowledge this point and to say this happened, we were involved, there were a few people involved, we're sorry, and we're going to help these Greek-born adoptees, we're going to help them get their citizenship. We're going to help them. Can you imagine? Why can't they just, I don't understand why they can't acknowledge this point. And to respond to that gentleman, HEPA is a great organization, a great organization.
I also wanted to add that the first people who were angry at the leadership of AHEPA were the AHEPans themselves. Because they felt they were dragged into it, and the name of the organization were dragged into it, and they registered their anger about that very vociferously. Yeah, I wanted to bring up something else in relation to what Alex Kitroev and the question that came up. We often use the word orphans, orphans of 1821, orphans of Asia Minor, orphans of the Civil War. And very often the adoptees themselves say, I'm an orphan. And I stopped them. I said, no, you're not. You had a mother. And it startles them because orphan is the kind of vehicle with which a child is prepared for adoption. But most of these children are not orphans. Only the very few in the beginning are orphans. But if you still have a mother, you are not an orphan. But then what does the word orphan do? If you grow up for a lifetime referred to as an orphan, you think, well, there's nothing to go back to in Greece. I shouldn't be looking for anything because technically orphan means there are no relatives, and certainly not a father and a mother. So it kind of, the term itself objectifies the child, prepares it for adoption, and cuts off a past by eliminating, diminishing, almost smothering any questions about that past. Because orphan means there's nothing before, there's no prehistory, there is only a future. And it also kind of evokes a certain kind of pity, a pitiful object of a person who needs to be taken care of. And it's a very uneasy term, and I don't like it. And it gets used too much in the literature to kind of serve as a vehicle to bring out feelings of altruism, charitable action, fundraising, and all of it.
From Gwyneth Lewis. When I was about 12 in Canada, our school raised money to send to a Greek child. Was there much of this to help children stay in Greece?
Yes. There were the so-called symbolic adoptions, where child sponsorship programs. For instance, the foster plan. It's called the plan today, but it had a more complicated name. Also, the program of care. You could be given a child, assigned a child, and then you started a correspondence with that child, and you would also send care packages. And then the child would send letters back, and very often these letters are translated into English, and this way you build a relationship with the child. But this is an economic relationship, and it's a symbolic relationship. It's called an adoption, like adopt a highway or something like that, but it doesn't translate into a formal adoption. Sometimes the family eventually travels to Greece and goes and sees the child, but it's not the intention of bringing over that child and making it a member of the family. And there was a lot of that going on, a lot of that.
We have a quite moving comment from Maria Lambrons Vinson, who says, thank you all so much for bringing our stories out to light. I thought all these years that I was the only one that went through this heartbreaking experience of being adopted with no paper trail. So I assume this is why your book is going to be a very powerful instrument.
A whole lot of these people have no birth certificate, for instance, or can't find it. And to be born in the 50s and the 60s and have no birth certificate, that just kind of cuts everything off, right? Mind you, in the 1950s and 60s, there are strict laws that says that you have to issue a birth certificate, but that doesn't mean it happens.
Could I ask something about DNA and the sort of the new ways that sort of science can help or can prove parental relationships? I mean, is this something that is sort of soothing or you know, it gives you sort of strength in some ways? Or?
Nearly every adoptee has done multiple DNA tests. Every conceivable DNA test with all the possible companies and uploaded at all the possible databases in the hope that one day you get that close match. And it's not enough to have a close match, you have to actually have a cooperative relative to delve into the story with you. And very often that first conversation is very difficult, and it's not uncommon that, let's say, your second cousin, who's clearly your second cousin, really doesn't want to go there and kind of breaks off communication, and that's kind of painful. So most people have enough DNA to prove that they come from the Peloponnese, for instance. Clearly, you know, the DNA kicks up all these Greek names or Greek American names, abbreviated names. So clearly, everything connects to Greek names. But then actually finding that close relative who will help you reconstruct the family tree and lead you to the source, that's very difficult.
I think we have more comments. Natasha Lemos, Artemis Zenet, to congratulate you for the stories and your presentations, and they're very grateful. If there are no other questions, there is a question here? Sorry, there is a question.
Gonda, last night at your book signing, there were some ladies from social services who approached Mary afterwards and asked for her help in raising money to digitize all the adoption records. And Mary being Mary, she said, oh, of course. But it just occurred to me that if the HEPA really wanted to make it right, that they should fix this by helping all of these adoptees first get their records and then get their citizenship.
The HEPA is a powerful organization that is really being noticed in Greece. If they wanted to turn this into a cause as a way of, you know, they were leaders then, to also be leadership to show leadership in issues of redress, that would be very powerful.
And they only asked for €100,000, which to the HEPA is not a lot of money.
So I thank you very much for participating from within the room and from quite far, I assume. It was a wonderful, I don't know what to say. It's a presentation and sharing your life experience. We surely look forward to the book. And you know, this talk has been registered. It's going to be archived on our website, so you can use it, I guess, for any way you want, except for making money. And thank you very much. And for those of us who have the pleasure to be in this room, I mean, there is, you can join us for a glass of wine outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you.